Hello everyone. Now, the news has just come in, confirmed by the BBC, that Jodie Whittaker and Chris Chibnall are set to leave Doctor Who in a trio of specials culminating in an epic blockbuster special to air in autumn 2022 as part of BBC's centenary celebrations. Next year, in 2022, Jodie Whittaker and Chris Chibnall are going to be leaving Doctor Who. That is the big news that has just come out of the BBC, and I haven't really looked on Twitter, apart from seeing, obviously, the tweets made by the BBC. I haven't looked at anyone else's reactions really. I just, as soon as I saw the news, I thought I'd hit record and give you my initial thoughts, and this is very odd news, I think. It's very odd timing, and I did not expect this news to come out at this time. Now, this had been leaked for ages. Obviously, Jodie Whittaker's departure was rumoured by that newspaper. I can't remember. Was it the Daily Mirror? I honestly cannot remember. Earlier this year, right at the beginning of the year in January. So people kind of had an inkling of, is this going to be a final series? Is this not going to be a final series? And obviously then we got the rumour, which I didn't cover on my channel, but the rumour that there were going to be a set of specials next year in 2022, and I didn't cover it because I wanted to get a confirmation. I wanted to get a confirmation that Jodie Whittaker was going to be leaving. Now we have that. Jodie Whittaker is confirmed to be leaving Doctor Who next year, which isn't really all out of the ordinary. It's not a shock to me. Not only has this been rumoured, but this is about the right time, I'd say. You know, in comparison to all the other modern Doctors and even certain classic Doctors. You know, they only really have 3 series on the programme, and I know a lot of people wanted her to do more, but ultimately I feel like that's about the right time for a Doctor. Sometimes it feels like it's a bit too short, but I think overall she's getting the specials as well. This is about right. It's about the right time for Jodie Whittaker to go. Because I've been saying this in certain videos that ultimately I feel like the show's gotten a bit stale, and ultimately I have got a bit bored of Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. She hasn't really progressed in the way that I would have liked her to. She's still, I don't know, she still hasn't really found her Doctor to me, and ultimately she's not my favourite incarnation, so although I don't hate her Doctor, I would welcome a change, and I think giving her, you know, the next couple of years and then her bowing out, I'd say that's about right for her Doctor. And we were all kind of expecting this, and some people who were shocked, I would imagine you probably should have come to terms with the fact that Jodie Whittaker is probably going to leave because it's been rumoured all year. But the big shock for me with this article, which I'm very shocked by, I did not expect this, Chris Chibnall is also leaving when Jodie Whittaker leaves. This is quite shocking because although Jodie Whittaker's exit has been rumoured for absolute ages, no one thought Chris Chibnall would be leaving. Chris Chibnall was thought to be staying on and obviously casting another Doctor after Jodie Whittaker would hypothetically leave. That's not the case. Chris Chibnall is leaving with Jodie Whittaker, which is interesting. It's obviously the only showrunner in the modern era to only carry out the show under one Doctor. Obviously both Rusty Davies and Stephen Moffat had 2 Doctors under their belt, obviously the 9th and 10th for RTD and the 11th and 12th for Stephen Moffat. So Chris Chibnall is the first one to only have 1 Doctor, that being the 13th Doctor. And it is very odd that Chris Chibnall is leaving because this wasn't rumoured at all, and I thought that he would stay on. But if you look at the timelines and you really think of the timelines, he's staying roughly the same amount of time as RTD did. And the only reason he's done a series less is because all the bloody delays and the gaps in between series. Ultimately, he will have done the same time as RTD, so it does make sense. I think that the only reason we expected him to stay on longer was just purely the mammoth amount of time that Stephen Moffat had on the programme, is the only real reason why we probably presumed that Chris Chibnall would undertake another Doctor. But ultimately, undertaking 2 Doctors is a big task, because as Moffat found out, how many years was he on the programme? 7 years? That's a long time, 7-8 years. I don't blame Chris Chibnall for wanting out now, because he's probably say, I don't really want to do another 4 years on the programme, so I'm just gonna, let my successor have free reign with a new Doctor, which absolutely makes sense. And I've often theorised on the channel that Moffat probably wanted to leave in 2014 after Series 8, had Matt Smith left at the end of that series as it was intended, before Matt Smith decided to leave a year earlier in 2013. So ultimately, this kind of period of a showrunner makes sense. I feel like it makes sense. I think for the creator, Chris Chibnall probably wants to go and make other things. It makes sense. It's just very shocking that ultimately, because I just didn't expect this news, I did not expect Chris Chibnall to leave, although I did kind of expect Jodie Whittaker to leave. But if you look at the timings of this, I think it's about right. I think both of them have had a good old attempt at the programme, and ultimately I think that right about now, it's about time for them to go. Regardless of my personal feelings towards these two, I think that regardless of what they've done, I think now is the right time for them to go. I think for Jodie especially, if Chris Chibnall was really bringing that amazing writing, then perhaps he could have stayed on for longer. But I think for me personally, you all know my thoughts on Chibnall. I'm not the biggest fan of his, and I'm not the biggest fan of what he's done with the programme. I think the writing has been quite poor, the story arcs poorly plotted, the characterisation quite weak, and I haven't been a massive fan of his individual stories and his approach to the programme. And I think he's made the show feel quite stale when he hasn't really, been in charge of the programme for long enough for it to really feel stale. So the fact that it does feel stale, as I mentioned in my Should Doctor Who Be Cancelled video, it just kind of shows that he really didn't hit the ground running, and I don't think he has really been all that impressive being at the helm of the programme. In terms of Jodie's departure, I did mention a lot of my thoughts in a video I made when her exit was rumoured back in January, so if you want to see more of my, first thoughts about that, then go watch that video. But ultimately, I think that if she was leaving at the end of this series, I would have been very disappointed, because it's a short series, and I think regardless of my thoughts on her Doctor, you all know I'm not the biggest fan of her Doctor. That ultimately a Doctor deserves a full series and not just a kind of cobbled together mess as a final series. It looks like we are getting a trio. Well, it doesn't look like we are getting a trio of specials, which I'm thinking, was that always the plan, or are those just like cut stories from series 13? Who knows? But yeah, it is nice that she seems to be getting more of a swan song, and hopefully her and Chibnall can pull out all the stops in those specials. I am interested in this blockbuster special, as it's referred to in the tweet. Does that mean we're getting like a feature film? Does that mean it's just, a 2-part special, like The End of Time, which I guess you could call that a blockbuster special? Put it together, it's over 2 hours long. But I don't know what that means. Does it mean we're getting a film? Could it release in cinemas? I honestly have no idea. Well, it says it's airing in autumn 2022. And I find that interesting because obviously The End of Time, that's Christmas and New Year. All of Jodie's specials has been New Year. The Doctors have, generally regenerated at Christmas in the modern era. So I do find it interesting that this is airing in autumn, in a similar time zone, I'd imagine, to when The Waters of Mars was released, but obviously that was the 10th Doctor's penultimate story, not his final story, which is interesting. I don't know, I presume that there's probably going to be a plot arc running through these specials, just like there kind of was in the 2009 specials. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what place Jodie's Doctor is at that point, because there may be some massive ramifications in Series 13 that puts her Doctor in a different position, maybe on the road to her demise. Maybe she's in a more reflective and depressed mood, like certain Doctors are, like Tennant is in his specials, like the 4th Doctor is in season 18. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see what companion she's travelling with, if any. Obviously Tennant travelled alone, but ultimately I can presume, I could be wrong, but I'm going to presume that Yaz is going to leave at the end of Series 13, and maybe Dan will stay on in the specials or not. But yeah, she could be travelling alone, who knows. I think it's a pretty decent way to end the 13th Doctor's era, because as I said, I'm not a big fan of her leaving in Series 13, because it seems like a bit of a cobbled together mess of a series that has been chopped and changed and is shortened. And I don't think it would have been nice to give her that as her final series. I could be wrong, the series could be excellent, but I just think it would be nice to give her a proper song. And this seems to be what we're getting in these specials. I do think that it is a bit derivative of RTD and the 10th Doctor to give her this year of specials. It works then, but ultimately it does seem another thing that's being copied from the RTD era, and not something that Chris Chibnall has uniquely come up with himself, but... yeah, ultimately, it's some weird news. Some news I certainly didn't expect, and yeah, it's weird. I feel like Chris Chibnall hasn't been all that impressive. I know he reportedly had that 5-year plan, and without doing the maths in my head, I imagine that that 5-year plan would be coming to an end. Yes, it would. I just did the maths in my head. That would be the end of his 5-year plan. So ultimately, if he did have a 5-year plan, then technically he's reached the end of it, so I don't know why I'm so surprised. But I just didn't expect Chris Chibnall to leave. For some reason, even though it does make sense for him to leave now, I did think he would undergo the change from a new Doctor and carry out that Doctor's stories, although I think it does make sense from a creative decision to leave at the end of Jodie Whittaker's tenure. With Jodie, she's not my favourite incarnation, far from it. I've been quite disappointed with the characterisation of the 13th Doctor, but there was a sense of improvement in Series 12, and as I said, I think there'll be an even bigger improvement in Series 13. And I think by the time these specials air, I think that Jodie would have found her Doctor and would be the best her Doctor can be. Fingers crossed that will be the case. Yeah, you know, even though I'm not the biggest fan of her Doctor, and I am kind of looking forward to a change, ultimately, you know, it's never nice to see a Doctor leave. So hopefully these specials really close out her era in a satisfying way. Ultimately, it does feel weird that these two are leaving, given that it feels like yesterday when Jodie Whittaker was cast as the Doctor and Chris Chibnall was announced as the next showrunner. But I felt like this way when Capaldi left. I felt, well, it only feels like yesterday when he was announced as the Doctor. These things go very quickly, and I ultimately think that it comes from a place of not feeling satisfied with their Doctor, feeling like they haven't quite reached the summit of their Doctor. So then when it's announced they are leaving, you felt, well, you know, I still haven't really felt that progression yet. I thought they would have gone further, and it only feels like they've been the Doctor for a short period of time, because I still haven't really felt as if they found their Doctor. That was me with Capaldi. That's kind of my feeling with Jodie Whittaker as well. But ultimately, Capaldi found his Doctor in his final series, so maybe Whittaker will. Ultimately, I think, even though some people may be saddened at this departure, I think if you look at the kind of time span of other creatives in the show and just their respective careers, it makes sense for them to leave after this period. And given that they've got a trio of specials and a blockbuster, almost movie-esque story coming up, hopefully they can close out Jodie Whittaker and Chris Chibnall's tenure on the programme in a satisfying way. One thing I actually do want to briefly say, I'd finished recording this video, I'm adding this in retroactively because I just thought of it, is what's going to happen regarding the Roof Doctor? We can all now presume that she's not going to be the 14th Doctor. Joe Martin isn't going to be the 14th Doctor, because a new creative coming in is going to want to cast their own Doctor. So ultimately that means that the Roof Doctor is something else. I ultimately was still holding out hope she would be the 14th Doctor. I thought all kind of stuff in the show, given she has a police box TARDIS and all sorts, kind of implied she would be the 14th Doctor, and the whole Timeless Child idea was a misdirect, but ultimately that's obviously not going to be the case. So I think it's interesting if she even shows up in Series 13, what her role will be, if she does, because she just could kind of be left there. Who knows? But ultimately, all our theories about will she become the 14th Doctor, I even made a video about it that you haven't seen, which obviously I have to preface that video with, this video was recorded before it was announced Jodie Whittaker would leave. Yeah, I guess she's not going to be the 14th Doctor now, which is a bit odd. If not her, who? I don't know. Also, who's going to be Chibnall's successor? I don't know. Lots of people have been saying Maxine Alderton. I don't know. I think her relationship with Chibnall is why she's getting more creative control in Series 13, but ultimately I think the BBC might want to cast someone outside of this current guild of writers for the position of showrunner, which they did in the classic series, which they haven't really done in the new series. They've all kind of came from the same friendship circle, RTD, Moffat and Chibnall. They all wrote for each other, so ultimately it would be nice to see someone outside of the pool of Doctor Who writers that we've become accustomed to since the show came back in 2005. Or maybe they will cast from within, as they always have done since the show came back in its current form. Who knows, it might be Maxine Alderton, although I think a lot of people really wanting her to be showrunner. I think it's a bit premature given she's only written one story, and although I enjoyed The Haunting of Idiodati, it certainly wasn't perfect. I have some major flaws with that story. But ultimately, who knows? I don't think anyone has really written strong enough stuff in Chibnall's era to really mark their way to be the next showrunner. So I really couldn't choose anyone from this current group. I know back when Moffat left, my main choice was Jodie Whittaker, because I think he wrote some amazing stories during Moffat's era. Under the Lake Before the Flood, The God Complex is amazing, and I quite like A Town Called Mercy also. Don't know if he should necessarily replace Chibnall. I think that boat may have sailed. I honestly have no idea who it could be. Obviously they could put someone like Jamie Matheson in, maybe Vinny Patel, Ed Heim. I honestly have no idea. And I probably prefer them to cast someone outside of their current pool of writers and go for someone completely out of the box. I think that would be great and probably the best option. But in terms of who they cast as the Doctor, I have no idea. In terms of who's Chibnall's successor, I have no idea. But one thing is for sure, that they're both leaving in 2022. Also, one thing to add on to this video, I've made very different add-ons, but upon looking at Twitter, someone actually raised a very good point that the 60th anniversary, or the potential 60th anniversary, will actually be in the new showrunner's first year. So that'll be very interesting. What will they do? Who knows? It'll also be the first series of a new Doctor. So who knows what's going to happen? Honestly, I don't know. But one thing I am a bit disappointed at is the fact that Jodie Whittaker may not return for the 60th. Now, she's by no means my favourite Doctor, but ultimately I would have liked for all of the modern Doctors to return. And ultimately it could be a bit of a Tom Baker situation where he'd only left a couple of years before the 5 Doctors, so he didn't want to return. Maybe Jodie will be the same, which will be disappointing. But ultimately I'm very interested to see what will happen with the 60th, because it's not really as obvious as what it would have been. Lots of people are speculating whether it would explore the Timeless Child reveal. That's not going to happen now, so yes, very interesting. It's put the 60th in a bit of a weird place, but to me it actually makes it much more interesting. I'll be honest, I'm much happier Chibnall isn't penning it. But yes, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, drop a sub, and hit that notification bell to stay notified for all my latest videos. It may seem as if I haven't really said much on, you know, my thoughts on Jodie, but ultimately, as I said, I made a video back in January of my initial thoughts of her Doctor leaving, so if you want more in-depth thoughts on Jodie Whittaker leaving the programme, then seek that video out. I may actually put it in the description, so if you want to find that, then check this video out. But yeah, ultimately, I'm just not that surprised. I was surprised with Chibnall, but I wasn't all that surprised with Jodie. It's more of a case of when rather than if, I think, with Jodie's departure, and now we have it. I am a bit surprised at Chibnall, but as I said, if you look at the time spans, really it does make sense that they're leaving. And even though I think that they've had a very mixed time period on the show, to say the least, hopefully they can close out their eras in a very satisfying and respective way. But yes, thank you guys for watching, and of course, a goodbye.